there's a view held by some older, formerly schooled guitarists that you shouldn't ever have to cheat by using a capo and should be able to form any chord shape with your fingers. Well, this older, formerly schooled guitarist thinks that's nonsense. It's just foolish pride talking, and ultimately a self-defeating notion that limits the possibilities of what you can play and the sounds you can create on your instrument. And it's comparable to another dumb dogmatic rule that says you shouldn't have to rely on altered tunings and should be able to play anything in standard tuning. Yeah, right. Tell that to a highly original and innovative songwriter like Joni Mitchell, who has made a brilliant career using open tunings. It's like a carpenter declaring you shouldn't have to rely on a nail gun or a cordless drill or a table saw when you have a perfectly good hammer, screwdriver, and handsaw. Yes, you could in some cases manage to get the job done rather arduously without the aid of these labor-saving tools. But why make things more difficult and limit yourself? The capo is a marvelous invention, one that offers the player of a stringed instrument a movable, finger-free bar across all the strings at any given fret, and thus the ability to take advantage of open strings relative to the capo. And finger-friendly, non-bar open chord shapes and voicings, those so-called cowboy chords. Now you have C, G, A7, D. Well, if you do this, there's G, C. You keep moving the capo up. Now you're playing in different keys, but you're still using. I'm still thinking of them as such. So it's determined by where you place the capo, and that's a huge plus for accommodating a vocalist's optimal singing range, right? You want to make it too high or too low? And by not having to commit your index finger to the task of barring, which in many cases limits and handicaps your fret hand's potential for movement, and instead being able to form chords with just your fingertips, you're now able to perform gracefully elegant, decorative, what I call James Taylor style melodic embellishments. So your major chords, minor chords, seventh chords. So you can add these sus2s, sus4s, and add 6s. Here's a G chord. I would never be able to do that. Well, I could try doing it without the capo. I could try doing this, make these so-called cage shape. But, this is so much better with the capo. And added benefit is that depending on how low your guitar's action is at the nut, meaning how low the individual saddles are cut, the capo can instantly lower the action at that end of the neck. Most guitars are set up with the string height coming from the factory, the string height at the nut to be higher than what would be like a 0 fret. And so the lower action afforded by the capo helps make all those previously mentioned open chord extensions, hammer-ons and pull-offs, all those little, as well as bar chords. Your F chord, your B minor, noticeably easier finger, like butter, which is a much welcome benefit for beginners and advanced and everyone in between. It also makes for more precise intonation, as there's less of that unwanted pitch sharpening that can occur when you press a string down next to a nut that's cut rather high. Perhaps this is why a lot of singer-songwriters subconsciously love using a capo. There have been many different capo designs invented over the years, ever since the early 20th century, or maybe earlier, when poor but resourceful blues and folk guitarists would fashion one out of a pencil and a rubber band. A capo is essentially a clamp, but there are other considerations to take into account, such as how quickly and conveniently it can be deployed and removed, and the degree of evenness of tension across the strings, which is very important because you don't want the capo to apply more pressure against some strings than others, as that can cause them to go noticeably sharp and out of tune, as happens if you squeeze a string harder than normal when fretting. You get that sharpening. You don't want the capo doing that, right? And you don't want the strings to buzz either from not being pressed down against the fret firmly enough. Say if you're like a beginner student, it's going to go, you're like, no, you need to press a little harder. Here are some helpful capo tips to minimize the pitch sharpening effect that can occur when deploying a spring-loaded capo, especially on an electric guitar and or at higher fretboard positions. It really helps to firmly press down the blade side of your pick hand across the strings over your guitar's pickups or sound hole if it's acoustic as you deploy the capo. See, I'm doing it here at the 8th fret. And doing this, what I call isometric karate chop, while placing the capo, helps take up any slack in the strings and evens out the tension in front of and behind the capo as it clamps onto and grips the strings, resulting in truer intonation and less of that capo weirdness and sharpening. 2, just as you would when fretting strings normally with your fingers, when deploying the capo, leave a little space or gap right here between it and the fret you're placing it behind, positioning it between the fret and the middle of that box, between the fret and the one below it. I find this placement not only creates a less steep of an angle of the downwardly bent string behind the fret, which helps reduce that unwanted pitch sharpening, it also gives the side of your fret hand index finger more elbow room to properly form chords, say like a B7 chord or a D7 or even a bar chord, without the side of your finger here bumping into the capo because it butts up against it, and the capo will force your finger to go possibly past the fret and you'll get a buzzy tone. So I find it's good to leave that little space there. Tip number 3, when playing close to the capo, meaning within 5 frets of it, I find it really helps to think of the notes and chords as transposing and relative to the capo, meaning as if the capo were your nut and now everything behind it doesn't exist. So the guitar starts right here, say at the 4th fret. So if I'm playing here capo 4 and I'm playing the open chords G, D, E minor, C, I find it helps to think of them as such, as G, D, E minor, and C, with the understanding that everything is going to be transposed up a major third, or 2 whole steps, to the key of B major. And so you wouldn't think of those 4 chords, you could, but you wouldn't want to think of them as, oh, that's B, that's F sharp, that's G sharp minor, and that's E. It's just too much to think about. Unless you need to shout out the chord names to a bass player or someone else who's not playing with a capo. And a better solution in that situation would be to just give the other musician a separate concert key chord chart to follow, right? Or just scribble out the chord changes, actual concert key changes. So that person can think of B, F sharp, G sharp minor, E, and you're still thinking G, D, E minor, C. However, when playing more than 5 frets up and away from the capo, such as when soloing with a capo, I find that it suddenly becomes more helpful, in some cases absolutely essential, depending on which fret you're capoed at, to revert back to concert key thinking and visualize the notes as you normally would, as if you were not using a capo at all. For example, I have a cool capo 4 arrangement I came up with to play Touch of Grey by the Grateful Dead that is enjoyable and finger-friendly and sounds pleasing and satisfying to play on one guitar. But when I go to improvise a single note solo high up on the neck, Jerry Garcia style, I think of the chord changes, of which there are quite a few, as being in the concert key of B, and look at the notes in terms of their absolute frets as opposed to the relative frets, which are counted up from the capo. Here's a little example of that Touch of Grey solo section. So the transposing chords during the solo section would be G, D, G, C, F, C, D, G, C. And then the chorus, I will get by. D, G, C. F, C, D, C, F, C, G, D. So when I play that song with my son Nick, I have 2 charts. I have one capo 4, it's on one page, the whole song, and then I have the other one concert key. So what I do is I look over at his chart for the solo changes. B, F sharp, B, E, A, E. And then I solo, I could do something like this. I'm gonna play my foot drums now. 2, 3, 4. That was off the cuff. And then when it comes back into the bridge section, I quickly look back over to the capo chart and just think, you know, A minor, A7 to D. So you get the point. When you're soloing with a capo, it's better to look at the frets as being the absolute notes, you know, and say if you're capo 1 and you're playing like, don't think G, you have to think A flat when you're up here. You'll do yourself a big favor by doing that.